Chapter 508. The affairs of the world were like a big dream. How many times did life experience the coolness of autumn? Unknowingly, the immortal city had once again arrived at the chilly autumn with falling leaves. Although during this period of time, Zhang Xianmeng and Fuyunji's men were busy pursuing and intercepting the evil sex forces in the immortal city, to completely eliminate this malignant tumor from the immortal city, but for the vast majority of the immortal city residents, these things did not affect their lives, and there were even many people who knew nothing about it. People lived in their own world. As long as it was peaceful within their sight, they would think that everyone and the whole world was safe and sound. Therefore, most of us could live happily and with a clear conscience, simply and quietly, until something woke up the beautiful dream. That day, the weather was a little gloomy. The autumn wind that blew from the four-river plain seemed a little harsh and chilly. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, but there was no sign of rain. In short, it was a gloomy day that looked no different from usual. Countless people in the immortal city were living their lives as usual. Everyone did what they were supposed to do. It was bustling and bustling as usual. Mount Sky Dragon stood tall and majestic. The huge statues of the four great divine beasts were still staring at this ancient and huge city as usual, until a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. As if there was no warning at all. In the sky above the immortal city, in the gloomy sky, suddenly, a strong red light suddenly appeared, and then from east to west, it stretched across the sky, like a boundary line that divided the sky into two halves. Immediately after, dark red light shot out from that red light, covering the sky, but strangely, these light only spread towards one side of the red line, and the other half of the sky was completely unaffected. It was still that gloomy look. Not long after, the sky became half gloomy and half blood red. This was of course an unusually rare strange phenomenon. And it happened right above the immortal city. Countless people in the huge city only needed to raise their heads, and they could easily see this scene. The blood-red light flickered and was reflected in the countless eyes that looked up. It was like a burning sea of blood. That strange aura made people subconsciously hold their breath, as if something terrible was about to happen. For that moment, inside and outside Immortal City, below and below Celestial Dragon Mountain, everyone fell into silence. Countless people looked at the sky above their heads, which seemed to have been torn in half. They were dumbfounded and didn't know what to do. However, this phenomenon did not last for too long. In less than 15 minutes, the red light in the sky dimmed. Soon all the light scattered, until the red line that split the sky also disappeared. The sky returned to that gloomy and lifeless day, as if nothing had happened. However, inside and outside the immortal city, countless discussions and whispers rang out in every corner of the immortal city. On Mount Tianlong, in front of the Kunlun Temple, perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen stood side by side at the entrance of the temple. Almost at the same time when the phenomenon appeared in the sky, perfected Lord Tianlan, who was talking to Lu Chen in the temple, sensed something and walked out to look at the sky. Together with Lu Chen, he basically saw this rare and strange phenomenon in the sky from the beginning to the end. When the rainbow light in the sky completely dissipated, and everything seemed to return to normal, the master and disciple in front of the Kunlun temple did not speak for a while. Lu Chen glanced at perfected Lord Tianlan. From the side, he suddenly realized that the usually calm perfected Lord Tianlan actually had some inexplicable emotions on his face. It seemed to be happy and sad at the same time, and it was hard to tell, which was rare. Perhaps sensing Lu Chen's gaze, perfected Lord Tianlan turned around, and exchanged glances with Lu Chen. His expression returned to normal, but he smiled and said, "Have you seen this phenomenon before?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I've never seen him before." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Yes, it is indeed a rare phenomenon. But judging from your expression just now, you seem to have an opinion?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and then said honestly, "Yes, I think it's a little strange because the red light in the sky just now is somewhat similar to the blood moon in the underground maze of the devil cult. But it's hard to say. After all, the entire underground cave is covered by the blood moon, but the sky is divided into two halves. It looks very strange." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him again, and then nodded. "You have a good eye. It is indeed similar to the blood moon in the underground palace of the devil cult. There should be some relationship that we don't know yet. Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, but at that moment he heard something different in perfected Lord Tianlan's words. So after a moment of hesitation, he still asked tentatively, "You just said the underground palace of the devil cult? And not the maze of the devil cult?" "The underground palace of the devil cult," perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly. As for what exactly the devil cult was, why was the huge underground palace built, and what great secret was there, perfected Lord Tianlan did not explain in detail to Lu Chen. He just asked Lu Chen lightly, "How's the matter at the devil cult? Have you found Elder Gui's hiding place?" Lu Chen said, "All the hidden spies have basically been removed by us. The devil cult's years of hard work here are almost all gone. We haven't found Elder Gui's whereabouts yet, but after a thorough search, there are not many places where he can hide. At most 2 months, we will be able to catch this old tortoise." Perfected Lord Tianlan first smiled and nodded, saying, "Well done. That old tortoise is cunning and indeed troublesome." As he spoke, he pondered for a moment, then kept his smile and said to Lu Chen seriously, "But the situation is different recently. I can probably give you a month's time at most. Bring that person called Chen He with you. The Fuyunji troops will be jointly commanded by you and Shuang. Do your best to catch this fiend." The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched, but he cleverly did not ask whether it was him or Shuang who was in charge of this matter. He only agreed. Then he looked at perfected Lord Tianlan and said, "Looks like this red light phenomenon is very important to you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand and said, "I'll tell you later." With that, he smiled and walked into the hall with his hands behind his back. Lu Chen looked at his back and suddenly shouted, "Do you want to live or die?" Perfected Lord Tianlan did not even stop walking. Along the way, he only waved his hand casually and said, "Either is fine." With that, Lu Chen did not ask anymore. From a certain point of view, perfected Lord Tianlan's words gave him a lot of power. But when he turned back to look at the calm sky again, an inexplicable anxiety slowly appeared on his face. He raised his head and looked at the sky in a daze, but no matter how he looked, he could not see anything unusual, let alone the mysterious blood moon underground that he was thinking about. A great show seemed to be slowly unfolding. This was a sudden feeling in Lu Chen's heart. Chapter 509. At a certain time during the day, the originally quiet celestial dragon mountain, or more precisely, this area of Fuyunji's territory, suddenly erupted into a commotion. Orders were sent out from the Floating Clouds Division's main hall. They were quickly sent out in all directions by the nimble people. Then, in a short period of time, more people began to gather from different places, like a stone smashing into the water and creating ripples. At this moment, there were already many people in the main hall. Most of them stood quietly and solemnly at the side. At the center of the symbol of power, Shuang and Lu Chen stood side by side. Some distance away from them, Old Ma and Chen He also stood there waiting for orders. Different from the people around them who faintly revealed a bit of killing intent, Shuang and Lu Chen's faces looked relatively calm, as if they did not feel that what was about to happen was some earth-shattering event. At least, they looked much calmer than the others. Shui Ying's gaze swept across the main hall, intentionally or unintentionally looking at Chen He's face. Then, without turning her head, she only lowered her voice and said in a voice that only Lu Chen beside her could hear, "Look, that Chen He seems a little excited." Lu Chen glanced over there, his expression also unchanging. He said, "There's nothing strange about it. When he first came to our side, his biggest capital was to think that he could help us capture Elder Gui. In the end, after so long, the evil cult has caught many spies, but the biggest one has never been seen. It's only right that he is a little anxious." Shuang suddenly smiled and said, "Right now, the person who wants Elder Gui dead the most is probably him. Maybe right now his mood is even more anxious than our Fuyunji." Lu Chen's gaze swept over there, and as expected, he saw Chen He standing there. Although at first there did not seem to be anything wrong, after careful observation, one could see that he seemed to subconsciously clench his fists. His gaze was sharp, and he occasionally glanced outside the main hall, as if he was very anxious, hoping that the people gathered here would arrive as soon as possible so that they could do that important thing. Lu Chen retracted his gaze, shook his head slightly, and said nothing more. However, both Lu Chen and Shui Ying's attention had been placed on Qin He earlier. Hence, they could tell that there was something strange about Qin He's expression. However, the two of them did not notice that the person standing beside Qin He had also turned his head around at this moment. Although his expression was the same, his eyes were a little strange as he looked at the two of them, who represented status and power in the crowd. Because they were too familiar with each other, people would always subconsciously ignore the people around them, always thinking that they would be the same as before, and nothing would change. Perhaps it was because of the many experiences they had in the past, and perhaps it was because of the trust that came from the bottom of their hearts that they would not think too much. It is as if we always think that our friend will always be there for us, as if it is only natural that he or she should be there for all eternity. Even the greatest and most meticulous person would often be like this. Lu Chen's gaze shifted away. He saw that more and more people were entering the Great Hall. Other than Fuyunji's troops, the group of experts dispatched from the Kunlun party had also been called over. He quickly saw Su Qingjun in the crowd. Coincidentally, that woman was also looking in his direction. Lu Chen revealed a trace of a smile, nodded at Su Qingjun and smiled. Unexpectedly, not only did Su Qingjun not smile back, she looked at him with a complicated expression. Her expression was cold, and after a moment, she turned her head away without any reaction, as if she did not see him. Lu Chen was startled. He thought, is she angry? But I did not provoke her recently. Or is it because something happened to Su Qingjun before, and she is unhappy? Seeing that almost everyone had arrived, Shuang glanced at Lu Chen, a trace of inquiry in her eyes. Lu Chen smiled, took half a step back, and at the same time made a modest gesture. Shuang smiled slightly, and did not decline again. She took a step forward. This time, she immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the Great Hall. The few whispers that were originally there immediately quieted down. Today we are going to do something big, Shuang said straightforwardly. Under the continuous pressure of Fuyunji and Zhengxianmeng, in the process of almost non-stop sweeping and exterminating the hidden spies of the evil cult, the people who stood in the light and absolute power could not understand the despair of those who were constantly being pressured. Hearing from time to time that their companions around them had died, and having a dark and lifeless future. Despair made people feel pain, it made people crazy, and it also made people have no way out. Even if they once had the most unwavering determination, it was possible for them to collapse at the last moment. This kind of thing happened. Among the last remnants of the evil cult, there were finally people who could not endure it in their hearts, and secretly sought refuge with Fuyunji. Then, like all the traitors in the world, they needed a presentable gift, a proof of allegiance. This proof of allegiance was quickly delivered to Shuang and Lu Chen. It was a piece of news. The traitor of the evil cult clearly pointed out that there was a very important, illustrious, but extremely mysterious high-ranking figure of the evil cult, who had been secretly arranged to hide in a secret place in a certain immortal city some time ago. And the reason why this traitor knew was because that place was the meaning of his existence. His mission was to protect this kind of important figure in the evil cult to temporarily take refuge. But now, this guardian of the refuge suddenly came to his senses, and felt that he had taken the wrong path in the past, and believed in the wrong person and the evil cult. Everything was the fault of the evil cult and that hateful elder ghost. Fuck the divine tree, fuck the myths and legends of unifying the three realms, they were all lies. I want to live. He did not know the identity of this important figure, but what he knew was that only the true important figures of the evil cult were qualified to hide in his place. When Shui Ying's words echoed in the great hall of Fuyunji, everyone became excited. The identity of that deeply hidden important figure seemed to be on the verge of being revealed, and to completely destroy the last vitality of the evil cult, there was probably only one last step left. Shuang quickly began to make arrangements, and divided the hundreds of elite troops in the great hall into several batches, each with a leader. At the same time, the troops were made up of 10 people, and with an abnormally firm attitude, she explained that the 10 people in each team would supervise the operation together. And if anyone dared to leave the team alone, or did anything to report to the outside, they would be immediately arrested and given the right to kill them on the spot. The meaning of this order was naturally clear to everyone. It was nothing more than an estimate that there were still some remnants of the evil cult that had infiltrated into Fuyunji, and in this capture, there was a high possibility that the important figure was Elder Ghost. No matter what, there could not be any accidents. The inescapable net, following the order, was opened. When the troops in the Great Hall filed out and flew down the mountain, Shui Ying and Lu Chen also walked in the same direction. At such an important moment, the two of them naturally had to be present. But as they walked, Lu Chen suddenly realized that Shui Ying's face did not seem to have much excitement, but instead looked a little disappointed. Of course, this was all hidden very well. If he was not standing next to her, he might not have noticed it. Lu Chen was about to open his mouth to ask, but then he thought of something and quickly suppressed this thought. He turned his head back to look at the tall and majestic Floating Clouds Division's main hall. This illustrious and prestigious palace towered high above Celestial Dragon Mountain. Sunlight shone on it, as if at this moment, it had already reached its most glorious and dazzling moment. Chapter 510. When going down the mountain, Chunhee and the team looked a little nervous, seemed to be both excited and agitated, and also a little anxious. He found Lu Chen, pulled him aside, lowered his voice and asked Lu Chen, "Will Supreme Tianlan come to today's arrest?" Lu Chen frowned, glanced at Chunhee. His expression was a little strange. Chunhee hurriedly shook his head and said, "Don't misunderstand, I have no other meaning. Since I have already decided to rely on Immortal Alliance, I naturally know what to do. But..." He suddenly stopped, looked left and right, and then approached Lu Chen, said in a low voice, "But today's matter is really important. If that person is really Elder Gui, we must not make a mistake, otherwise, it will be very difficult to find such a good opportunity next time." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, said, "You don't have confidence in Fuyunji's people?" Chunhee smiled bitterly and said, "Of course not. Fuyunji has been fighting with the evil cult for so many years. Of course I know how powerful they are. But you also know, Elder Ghost is the last remaining master of the evil faction. And for many years he has always been mysterious and unfathomable. Even though I have been his messenger for many years, I have never been able to find out his background. For such a person, his cultivation realm, Dao skills and supernatural powers, are almost unpredictable." He paused again, said softly, "But if that Elder Gui has some secret means, or if he has secretly cultivated, his cultivation is extremely high, even reaching the level of deity stage, then it will be troublesome. Even if we can suppress him with so many people, we will either suffer heavy casualties, or risk of him escaping if we are not careful. But if there is Supreme Tianlan in charge, the situation will be completely different." These words were reasonable, and Lu Chen couldn't refute them for a moment. However, he didn't immediately agree or answer Chunhee. Instead, after thinking for a moment, he said, "What you said does make some sense. However, my master is an elusive person, and his whereabouts are unfathomable. Although the various arrangements for today's matter were made by the Floating Clouds Agency, it is only natural that he is aware of it. However, I do not know whether he will come later, or whether he will observe from the shadows." Chunhee was silent, probably understood something, then nodded to Lu Chen, and walked forward. Lu Chen looked at his back, frowned slightly, after a while, also continued to walk. To carry out such an important arrest, of course it was impossible to swagger through the streets with a large group of people, and then arrogantly stroll to other people's door and knock. Even if you were strong and had an absolute advantage, this kind of behavior was not awe-inspiring, but would be called retarded. Before going down the mountain, this group of elite people dispersed silently, like water droplets converging into the vast ocean. In the blink of an eye, no trace could be found. However, under the calm sea, there were countless undercurrents that were closing in on the same target from all directions. Lu Chen and the other large group separated. Walking on the streets of the Immortal City, he looked inconspicuous, like an ordinary person. Just as he walked near the long street where the explosion had happened before, a series of footsteps sounded behind him. He turned his head to take a look, and found that it was Old Ma rushing over, walked to his side, and walked side by side with him. The two of them often walked in and out together, so they were not afraid of revealing their whereabouts. Lu Chen nodded to greet him, and Old Ma also smiled. Are you nervous? After all, that is the last big head. Old Ma asked. Lu Chen thought for a moment but smiled and said, It's all right. You don't say. I have never thought about this before, but after you mentioned it, I found that I really don't feel excited. Probably because the evil faction is too weak, we don't really care about it anymore. Old Ma was a little emotional, sighed a few times, and said, How many years has it been? In the early years, I always felt that the evil faction was still a huge monster, the mortal enemy of our good faction. To defeat them was extremely difficult, and we don't know how much blood and lives had to be sacrificed, but in the end today, it has become like this. Lu Chen lightly said, Things are always done by people. If they did not do those things in the past, they would not have become like this so quickly. Old Ma was silent for a moment, then smiled and nodded, and said, You are right. The two of them walked through the long street, passing by the place that was blown to pieces, and there was only a big pit, and it was also tightly surrounded by many layers of cloth. Looking at the guards outside, Lu Chen and Old Ma both took a few steps to the side, and stayed away from that place. Recently, I have been too busy to come here, and I thought that this place should have been filled up. Why is it still like this? If it was only for a passage to enter and exit the underground maze, it was indeed only necessary to leave a passage. This long street was bustling, and it was indeed very inconvenient to enclose a piece of land like this for a long time. Standing beside Lu Chen, Old Ma glanced over there, and then whispered, I know this. I heard that not only did they not reduce the number of guards, but they also seem to have increased the number of people recently, and the defense seems to be impenetrable. Now, except for the Starry Temple's own people, almost no one from other halls can go to the underground maze. Lu Chen paused for a moment and said thoughtfully, Speaking of which, it seems that after we left that place, we did not go down again. Old Ma shrugged and said, Isn't that so? But from what you said, it seems that there is no reason to go down there. Lu Chen smiled and did not answer. Old Ma and him walked a few steps forward, and suddenly coughed, and asked Lu Chen, Oh yes, when I was going down the mountain just now, I saw Chen. He specially ran over to look for you, and whispered to you for a long time. At this time, why did he look for you? Lu Chen did not think too much, and said, Oh, that's because he was a little worried, and ran over to ask me about the whereabouts of the damn Baldy, and whether he will go over today. Old Ma's expression suddenly changed, and Lu Chen glanced at him, and said, Don't worry, I just brushed it off, and did not say anything. Old Ma shook his head and said, No, why did this guy suddenly ask about Sir's whereabouts? Could it be that he has other plans? Lu Chen pondered for a moment and shook his head and said, This should not be the case. Right now, among our group, the one who wants Elder Ghost dead the most is probably Chen He. But he is worried that the old tortoise's cultivation is too high, and he is afraid that we will let him escape. Old Ma nodded, and then said with some disdain, He thinks too much. Lu Chen also smiled and turned his head. Seeing that they were unknowingly about to cross the long street, he suddenly thought of something, and suddenly raised his head to look at the sky above his head, and then turned back to look at the place that was tightly surrounded by cloth. Suddenly, Lu Chen was startled, and saw that above the ground that was surrounded by the cloth, there was suddenly an inconspicuous auspicious cloud floating over, and then quietly landed, disappearing into the depths of the heavy cloth, and in a blink of an eye, disappeared without a trace. Who was that? Chapter 511. Unlike the scene of many Starry Hall's disciples bustling about in the underground maze a while ago, this huge underground city was still shrouded in a strange blood-red light, but almost no one could be seen as far as the eye could see. The people of Starry Hall who were working here had already evacuated, perhaps because of the omnipresent and elusive strange aura, or because they had already done what they should do. In the huge underground city, many tall buildings stood silently. They were empty, but they seemed to be quietly waiting for their owners to return at some point in time. A tall and burly figure appeared in this huge underground cave, and walked into the long street of the underground city. When the light from the blood moon in the sky shone on his head, it would occasionally refract a strange halo. Starry Hall had already sealed this place, and did not allow outsiders to enter or leave. Even most of the other halls in Zhangxianming were the same. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan was an exception. Looking from afar, his wide sleeves fluttered as he walked, making him look like he was walking in a sea of blood. Every step he took seemed to leave a blood-red footprint on the ground. The empty city looked especially cold and murderous. However, as he gradually walked into this city that was bathed in the blood-red light, some strange and distorted runes gradually appeared in his line of sight. These runes were carved on the road, the corner of the wall, the door frame, the stone, and all sorts of corners. They seemed to be unrelated, but in fact, they were indistinctly independent. At a certain moment, after True Lord Tianlan's footsteps crossed an invisible boundary, suddenly, like a stone thrown into calm water, a series of ripples abruptly appeared around his body. The light and shadow in the air suddenly twisted and trembled, as if a wall of water was erected in front of him and swayed. It twisted into a strange mirror image in front of Perfected Lord Tianlan, reflecting his shadow. It was as if another version of him had suddenly appeared in front of him, staring at him coldly. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression did not change as he looked at his other self indifferently before walking over. His body passed through the figure, and continued forward without a sound. The figure actually turned around and looked at his back. Then, it began to tremble and gradually dissipated into the air. The surroundings were silent, as if it had suddenly quietened down. Actually, after the Starry Hall disciples left, there was basically no sound in this underground cave. It was very quiet. However, when one was inside, there would more or less be some sounds, for example, the sound of unknown insects in certain corners, or the sound of wind drifting from the corner of a certain cave entrance. However, after crossing that invisible line, all the sounds in the city suddenly disappeared. It was a true silence that seemed to isolate all sounds outside of that invisible boundary. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked around and nodded slowly. There was a hint of satisfaction on his face. Then he continued to walk forward until he reached the center of the underground city, next to the huge statue that connected the ground and the dome of the subterranean cavern. Perfected Lord Guyu of the Starry Hall was sitting here a few times before. The two of them would chat when they met. However, it was rare that even Perfected Lord Guyu was not around this time. It could be considered as truly empty. Perfected Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment. His gaze fell on the spot where Perfected Lord Guyu usually meditated. After a while, he walked over and stood there. Everything seemed to be the same. The only difference was that he was a little closer to the statue. After a while, when Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at the sky, he soon realized that when he looked at the blood moon from this position, he seemed to be able to see a gap in the red light around the blood moon. In that gap, the blood moon seemed to be rotating slowly. In the past, there were no gaps around the blood moon at all. This place was clearly something that had appeared not long ago. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled, and did not seem to be too bothered. Then he walked to the side of the statue and reached out his thick and broad palm to press on it. It was ice cold. The statue did not move. But after a while, something seemed to throb behind the stone. Then a terrifying aura suddenly rushed out from the depths of the statue. The aura was ferocious, and the number seemed to be unbelievably large. It was as if there were tens of thousands of evil spirits imprisoned in this huge statue. Then at this moment, they suddenly felt the aura of the flesh and blood of a living person, and immediately surged out like raging waves. The statue remained motionless, as if all the movements had nothing to do with it. However, in the depths of the stone, a terrifying roar seemed to come from the depths of the netherworld. Wave after wave, endlessly, crazily rushed towards Perfected Lord Tianlan. Thud thud, thud, a strange and deep sound slowly rang out. It was originally extremely soft and almost inaudible to ordinary people. However, in the middle of this extremely quiet underground city, it was exceptionally clear and made one's hair stand on end. However, there was no fear on Perfected Lord Tianlan's face. He even looked at the stone surface of the huge statue in front of him with a look of disdain. He slowly raised his hand and gradually left the stone surface. As if sensing that the warm aura of flesh and blood was gradually leaving, the strange voices behind the stone suddenly became agitated. All sorts of strange, mournful, and terrifying roars rose and fell, shouting at the top of their lungs. However, they were imprisoned by the stone and all their desires were destined to turn into nothingness. The hand left the stone surface. Whung! Like a string suddenly hitting a high note. All the noise suddenly disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. The statue was still a statue and the stone surface was still a stone. There was no change and no strange things appeared again. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked down indifferently. His gaze landed on the place where the statue was deeply buried in the ground. A pondering expression appeared on his face as he raised his head to look at the blood moon above his head. In the end, he suddenly let out a soft sigh and muttered to himself, "It should be soon. There's only one last step left." Before he finished speaking, Perfected Lord Tianlan's body suddenly paused and he raised his eyebrows. He instantly turned around and his eyes were cold and bright. An indescribable aura suddenly surged in all directions like a huge flood. At that moment, even the omnipresent blood-red light seemed to avoid this burly figure. Then the surroundings became silent. There was no sound at all and no trace of anyone. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes, which were as deep as the night, were rippling as he coldly swept his gaze across the surroundings. After a while, his gaze slowly stopped at a house near the city. As the light floated, it passed through the doors and windows, the courtyard, the empty corridors, the stone paths, the wasteland, and then a deep well that had long dried up. A dark shadow was hiding in the depths of the well. There was no warmth or aura from its body. It was like a natural stone that silently stayed in the darkness. Everything happened just now. When the terrifying and strange aura from the statue appeared and disappeared in an instant, his heart beat slightly faster. In the distance, Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the house and frowned. Chapter 5:12. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not deliberately lighten his footsteps, nor did he look nervous or cautious as if he was facing a great enemy. He merely walked towards the house as if he had sensed something. He walked calmly, naturally, calmly and confidently, as if he was completely fearless, as if there was nothing in this world that was worthy of his scruples. Even if he was in this desolate underground labyrinth, even if the scene of thousands of ghosts roaring had just happened not long ago, he looked as if he did not believe in heaven and earth, did not respect ghosts and gods, and despised fate. He only cared about himself and believed in his own strength. That was why he didn't even bother to lighten his footsteps or disguise himself. He just walked straight into the empty mansion with a wave of his wide robe sleeves. The house that was shrouded by the red light of the blood moon had a strange color. At first glance, it even looked as if the walls and house were slowly oozing blood. If a timid person were to come here, he would probably be scared to death. However, to Perfected Lord Tianlan, these were, of course, meaningless illusions. There was not even the slightest ripple in his eyes as he calmly swept his gaze across the surroundings and observed the house. Under the red light, it was as silent as the outside. There was no sound at all. The extremely faint movement that had suddenly appeared at a certain moment earlier had naturally disappeared without a trace. In retrospect, that extremely faint movement that could not even be considered a sound was more likely just a momentary trance or a momentary illusion. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned as he stood at the entrance of the house, quietly looking at every corner of the house, as if he was lost in thought. At the same time, in the deserted backyard of the house, at the bottom of the dry well, where darkness shrouded, that black figure seemed to have completely turned into a lifeless stone, sitting motionlessly against the wall. There was no warmth, no breath, and no heartbeat. He did not even look like a dead person, but rather a stone that was as good as new. Perfected Lord Tianlan stood at the entrance for a long time, but still did not take any further action. It seemed that he was not sure what had happened just now, or perhaps he had only suddenly sensed a slight movement in the direction of the house, but after he came over, all the movements had disappeared. So, was it an illusion, or did it really exist? Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes shone brightly as he continued to scan the mansion. The invisible yet fearsome aura emanating from his body seemed to seep into every corner of the mansion. A moment later, he suddenly strode forward and walked into the house. In the dark well, The black shadow that had almost completely fallen into a deathly stillness raised its head slightly in the darkness. There seemed to be a strange light flickering in the darkness. He looked a little nervous. Pung pung. The footsteps were neither fast nor hurried as they steadily and forcefully stepped on the ground. Although there wasn't any great commotion, the figure in the darkness could clearly feel that some of the creatures living in the darkness in the depths of the soil beneath him, the little bugs and monsters that were far away from the surface and had never seen light their entire lives, were all fleeing in all directions, desperately trying to leave this place. A gust of wind suddenly blew past this place. There was almost no wind here. The figure in the darkness seemed to sense something and slowly raised his head. He looked up and vaguely saw a tall and burly figure suddenly appear near the mouth of the well. The light of the blood moon shone down from above, casting a black shadow on Perfected Lord Tianlan's broad body and shrouding the mouth of the well. Perfected Lord Tianlan stopped in his tracks. This was the first time he had stopped walking from the front hall to the backyard. It was a desolate scene around him. Apart from himself, there seemed to be no other signs of life. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Everything seemed to be silent, empty, and lifeless. After a moment, Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze swept across all the corners of the place. Then he frowned slightly and his gaze landed on the last corner, that dry well. The large group of people from Fuyunji split up and snuck into the ocean-like immortal city. Then, 2 hours later, they quietly gathered from all directions and appeared outside a large mansion in the Vermilion Bird district of the immortal city. Without a sound, they dispersed all the irrelevant people in the surroundings and suppressed all the abnormal noises and noises. It was said that in the past, there was a lame joke in the immortal city. It was said that the name of Xingxian Meng Fuyunji could stop children from crying at night. This was used to make fun of the devil sect demons in the immortal city for hiding like children. However, based on today's performance, even if the name of Fuyunji didn't make everyone fearful, it at least made most people revere them. Almost everyone cooperated and left. Thus, in silence, the people from Fuyunji surrounded this place. On the long street outside the mansion, Lu Chun and Old Ma stood side by side. Old Ma looked at the mansion that occupied a large area and sighed. These devil sect bastards seem to be quite rich. Then he said to Lu Chun in a low voice, "I say, do you think the big guy hiding in this house today, could it be that old turtle?" Lu Chun pondered for a moment, nodded and said, "I think there is at least a 70% chance that it is him. Some time ago, we wiped out many of the devil sect's spies and informants. Almost all of their nests were wiped out by us. No matter how cunning and treacherous Elder Ghost is, the places he can hide in will definitely become less and less. Other than that, in the devil sect today, especially in the immortal city, other than Elder Ghost, I really can't think of anyone else who can be considered as a big shot in the sect." Old Ma made a sound of acknowledgement and seemed to agree with Lu Chen's words. His face also revealed a look of anticipation. He clenched his fist and waved it and said, "After getting rid of that old turtle, I want to see how those devil sect bastards can still stir up trouble. They will probably perish here." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I hope so." As he spoke, he glanced at the house. In the depths of his eyes, a trace of complicated emotion flashed past. Even though it was a blood feud, even though they were irreconcilable enemies, even though the devil sect was so weak and Lu Chen had contributed a lot, not to mention that everyone wanted to kill each other as soon as possible, but Lu Chen had after all lived in the devil sect for many years. Seeing this sect that had been passed down for 1,000 years was about to reach its end, he also felt an inexplicable emotion in his heart. The once flourishing, the heroes and heroism, all like the morning dew in a dream, disappeared in the past history, never to return. In front of them, there was a tall and charming figure. That was Shuang. After arranging everything, Shuang also seemed to feel that she had vaguely ushered in the highest peak of her life. That sense of accomplishment and satisfaction made her face exude an astonishing beauty. She raised her hand and waved heavily towards the house. Instantly, countless figures charged in from all directions while furious roars and shocked cries resounded. After a short moment, miserable and shrill cries pierced through the tranquility of the city, and they reverberated throughout the bright world. causing the clear sky to be covered in a layer of blood-red shadows. Chapter 5:13. After becoming the leader of a force and grasping power, there would be all kinds of benefits. One of the most important benefits was that in most cases, the leader would no longer have to rush to the front lines and risk his life to fight. The same reason also applied to the few trusted subordinates of the leader. What was so good about fighting and risking their lives? There was always the danger of swords and axes, and their lives were in danger. Moreover, it was very unsightly to shout and roar in a fierce battle. There was no grace and majesty. How could it compare to standing at the back and giving orders in a safe place? It was the most worthwhile thing in the world to let others do the dangerous things, and to take the credit and the fruits of the battle was the best thing in the world. Of course, most things in this world were fair. Most people who could reach this level of status had experienced countless difficult trials and suffered untold hardships to reach this step. Although there were a few people who were lucky enough to reach the sky in a single step, there were still a few people who were lucky enough to reach the sky in a single step. Old Ma had benefited from Lu Chen. At this moment, he did not rush to the front lines to experience the bloody slaughter, which made him feel very lucky. However, he more or less felt a little uncomfortable. Later on, when he heard the sounds of fighting and miserable cries coming from the big house on the other side of the wall, he faintly felt a little ashamed. Then he realized that it was probably because he didn't fight with his companions from the Floating Clouds division, and stood in a safe place, as if he was a deserter. He could not help but look at Shui Ying and Lu Chen, who had already walked to the front and were standing side by side to observe the situation. Then he found that their faces were calm and indifferent, as if everything that was happening in front of them was a matter of course. There was not even a hint of anxiety or nervousness on their faces, let alone a hint of guilt. Could it be that he was not thick-skinned enough? As this thought flashed across Old Ma's mind, he suddenly heard a burst of exclamations and screams in the big house. A moment later, a man's voice suddenly roared loudly. "Who are you? How dare you kill innocent people in broad daylight?" No one replied. Or rather, the most direct answer was the sound of blades clanging and shadows. That man's voice was quickly interrupted. After a series of booming sounds, it was obvious that the voice was much weaker. At the same time, it carried a bit of mournfulness, anger and despair. He shouted sternly, "Let me tell you, this is the property of Heavenly Law Hall. Aren't you afraid of angering Supreme Taihu by doing this?" When these words reached them, Shui Ying, Lu Chen, and even Old Ma, who was standing to the side, were all startled, their expressions changing slightly. Lu Chen immediately turned his head to look at Shui Ying. Shui Ying sensed his gaze and frowned slightly, but after a moment of silence she shook her head and said, "I've investigated this family's background before, and there's no such thing." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then nodded without saying anything. But Old Ma, who was standing beside him, hesitated for a moment, then took a step forward and said in a low voice, "It could also be a private property that Supreme Taihu had secretly arranged, or an estate that belonged to someone else under his name. Otherwise, he wouldn't have mentioned only Supreme Taihu by name, and not the other Supreme Lords." He paused for a moment, then said softly, "If we're not careful, I'm afraid that it might cause the two lords to be unhappy and fight." Lu Chen frowned. After a moment he said in a deep voice, "Once the bow is shot, there's no turning back. It's useless to say these things now." Old Ma nodded, said no more, and stood back. That was indeed the case. Currently, the big house was filled with the sounds of killing. Those who should be killed, many were killed, and those who should be killed, many died. How could they turn back? As for what would happen later, if Supreme Taihu were to be angry and punish them, they could only rely on Supreme Tianlan to bear the brunt. Fortunately, after so many years, perfected Lord Tianlan did not disappoint in these matters. When Lu Chen, Old Ma, and the others encountered difficulties and simply and crudely threw all the possible bad results to Supreme Tianlan, the person whom they had high hopes on, of course, could also be said to be the biggest scapegoat, the damned Baldy whom Lu Chen often talked about, was standing in the underground city. In the blood-red light, he looked calm but somewhat solemn, staring at the dried-up well not far away in front of him. He had inspected almost every place in the mansion, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Only this dry well in the wasteland of the backyard could be considered the last blind spot. If there were no suspicious points here, even Supreme Tianlan had to admit that he had probably sensed wrongly at that moment. There was no dangerous person here as he suspected. At least for now. The mouth of the well was dry, cracked, and covered with dust. It seemed that it had not been used for many years, not to mention that there might be something hidden under it. However, perfected Lord Tianlan didn't intend to give up halfway. Although he wasn't sure if the outsider he suspected was hiding here, it wouldn't hurt to take a look at this place since it was the only place left. Soon he came to the edge of the mouth of the well. His tall figure covered the mouth of the well. Just when he was about to lean over to take a look, his body suddenly paused. Supreme Tianlan suddenly raised his head and looked back. An auspicious cloud flickered in the sky for a moment before dispersing. A moment later, the sound of footsteps could be heard. After a while, a silhouette appeared at the entrance of the house. The person hadn't arrived, but the sound had arrived first. "I say, what are you doing here alone?" Along with the laughter, Supreme Guyu of the Starry Hall appeared in his sight. He walked over with a smile, and at the same time he clicked his tongue in admiration. He looked around the house a few times, and then said to Supreme Tianlan with a smile, "Could it be that you found some treasures buried by the demon clan? Let me tell you, if there's really such a good thing, you can't hide it from me. Everyone who sees it has a share." Perfected Lord Tianlan rolled his eyes, straightened his body at the entrance of the well, and turned around to face Perfected Guyu. "What treasure? Is there really such a thing? Your subordinates have almost turned this place upside down these days. What can't they find?" Perfected Lord Tianlan rolled his eyes. Supreme Guyu did not refute and said with a smile, "Maybe their cultivation is too low and they can't find the hidden treasure." Perfected Lord Tianlan scoffed and took 2 steps towards him with his hands clasped behind his back. "I was here a while ago. I felt that there was something strange in this house, as if someone was hiding here. That's why I came to take a look." Supreme Guyu was shocked and said, "There's actually such a thing? Did you find the person?" Supreme Tianlan shook his head and said, "No." After a pause he frowned and said, "That voice was too weak and soft. Did I hear wrongly?" Guyu Perfected Monarch thought for a while, then pointed at the blood moon above her head and said, "Now that this place is constantly illuminated by the blood moon's radiance day and night, it greatly affects us cultivators. Perhaps you are also affected by the blood moon. That's why you made a mistake?" Supreme Tianlan hesitated for a while, and then nodded slowly. He said, "What you said seems to make some sense." Supreme Guyu smiled and made an inviting gesture. The 2 of them walked out side by side. At the same time, Supreme Guyu said, "When I came here today, I saw your subordinates from Fuyunji gathering and going down the mountain. It seems like they're going to do something big." Supreme Tianlan looked at him and nodded. He said, "Yes, they told me that they're going to capture that Elder Gui and bring him to me today." Chapter 5:14. Guyu True Lord laughed. His expression did not show much surprise. People who were in their positions, of course they were not people who were isolated from the news. There would always be all kinds of news transmitted to them through different channels. As to the degree of truth and falsehood, and how to make use of it, it was up to these bigwigs themselves to choose. So Guyu True Monarch seemed to not particularly care about that extremely famous evil sect's last important leader, Elder Ghost. Speaking of this matter, although the evil sect was still notorious, intimidating, synonymous with the evil sects, the public enemy of the world's good faction, and also the #1 enemy that Zhangxianmeng had erected, but in fact, in the eyes of those bigwigs in Zhangxianmeng, the evil sect was no longer in their eyes. Even if the evil sect still tossed around a few times and made some movements, but obviously everyone looked down on the evil sect more and more, no longer changing their expressions at the mention of the tiger in the past. However, when Guyu True Lord and True Lord Tianlan talked about this matter, of course, they did not intend to discuss the current situation of the evil sect. At most, he only smiled and said to True Lord Tianlan, "Evil sect Elder Ghost is after all the last elder level figure. The depth of his cultivation is still unknown, Why don't you go and hold the fort for a while? True Lord Tianlan said indifferently. That old tortoise has been lurking in the immortal city for tens of years and did not dare to show his head, cowering all day long. What future can he have? I don't believe that a true lord who has cultivated to deity transformation realm would be so cowardly. Since that's the case, this person is not to be feared. Guyu True Lord nodded, seemed to agree with True Lord Tianlan's words. He sighed and said, Indeed so, thinking back to the past, although the evil sect was ferocious at its peak, but in the sect, there were indeed many outstanding geniuses. Who would have thought that today, the descendants are really so unbearable? True Lord Tianlan disdainfully smiled and said, Now in the evil sect, it's just incompetent people, but in the first 10 to 20 years, there were Yin Zhongyang and a few other old men who could look after it. It could be considered as barely maintaining the situation. Who do these people think they are? Guyu Perfected Monarch laughed. Speaking of this, weren't those old men still killed by you in the end? Back then, when I heard about this matter, I really sucked in a breath of cold air. The shadow you sent out was really amazing. He was so patient and tenacious, and his final strike was even more ruthless. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he changed the situation with a single sword strike. When he spoke up to hear, he shook his head and sighed. At that time, I was thinking that if there really is such a person hiding by my side and not giving himself away for 10 years, then I'm afraid I won't be able to escape this sword from the back at the critical moment. Tao techniques, divine arts, and perfected monarchs are nothing in front of such a terrifying assassin. Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brows slightly and smiled with a calm expression. Brother Guyu, you must be joking. We're people who have cultivated to the soul formation realm after all. How can we be so easily schemed against? Even if it's his trusted aide, it won't be easy for him to succeed. Perfected Lord Guyu laughed and then waved his hand. Speaking of which, where did the two of us go? Haha, let's not talk about it anymore. Oh right, I actually came over to talk to you about another matter. It's related to the elder Gui that your subordinates are chasing today. However, it has nothing to do with the fiend cult. It's that mansion. Perfected Lord Tianlan was slightly surprised. What about that mansion? Is there a problem? Perfected Lord Guyu hesitated for a moment. I've also heard some news. After thinking about it, I'll tell you about it. Today you guys went to surround that mansion. On the surface, it's obviously unrelated people. However, in reality, the owner might be the adopted daughter of Heavenly Law Hall's Perfected Lord Tiehu, Song Wenji. Perfected Lord Tianlan was clearly startled. He didn't expect Perfected Lord Guyu to actually say this. And Perfected Lord Guyu saw Perfected Lord Tianlan's surprised expression. After a moment of silence, he also revealed a trace of a bitter smile. You're quite surprised too, right? Not to mention you, when I first heard about this, I was also a little stunned. For so many years, old Tiehu has always thought of himself as a virtuous person. Normally, he is also very strict with others and himself. Logically speaking, even if he dotes on this adopted daughter very much, he shouldn't have given her. Perfected Lord Guyu thought for a moment. Could it be that Song Wenji, this girl, is spoiled and arrogant? Relying on old Tiehu's reputation and power, she took everything for herself and bought this estate? That mansion occupied a rather large area, and was located in the prosperous area of the world's #1 immortal city. Its value couldn't be underestimated. An ordinary cultivator wouldn't be able to afford it. Moreover, Song Wenji herself was only a young lady in her early 20s. Then where did this money come from? And why did she have to cover up the owner of the house? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Perfected Lord Guyu. After staring for a while, he suddenly laughed. You're not being honest. Why don't you dare to say it directly? Must you make me say it? Perfected Lord Guyu smiled. My star hall is small and weak. How can I afford to offend those righteous gentlemen from Heavenly Law Hall? Perfected Lord Tianlan spat. You already know that Heavenly Law Hall is in trouble. Why do you think I dare to offend them? Perfected Lord Guyu said seriously. You're a hooligan stronger than him. Scram. Perfected Lord Tianlan glared at the cunning Perfected Lord Guyu. After pondering for a moment, he said, As you said, this mansion probably has something to do with old Tiehu. As for whether there are still evil cult demons hiding inside, it's hard to say. Perfected Lord Guyu nodded. So after thinking about it, I still have to come and tell you. The situation over there is a little delicate. You should go and keep an eye on it. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a while before nodding in agreement. Then he frowned and said, if old Tiehu is really muddle-headed, I can't give in to him in front of so many subordinates. Perfected Lord Guyu shook her head. That old thing is very prideful. As long as you really catch the evil cult demons, I'm afraid he definitely won't come out. That's true. Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly sneered. He seemed to have some disdain for the highly respected head of Heavenly Law Hall, Perfected Lord Tiehu. Then, he waved his sleeve and strode towards the door. When he passed by Perfected Lord Guyu suddenly called out to him and said, "Oh right, that shadow from the Battle of the Desolate Valley, is he still under you? Can you find a chance to let me meet him?" Seeing Perfected Lord Tianlan's strange gaze, Perfected Lord Guyu smiled and said, "This kind of talent, I've been fascinated by him for a long time. I really want to meet him and see what kind of outstanding person he is." Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, he was unlucky. During the Battle of the Desolate Valley, his injuries were too heavy and he has already died. Perfected Lord Guyu was startled. Then he nodded and Perfected Lord Tianlan left. Perfected Lord Guyu looked at his back. His expression gradually turned cold. After a while he seemed to have thought of something and sighed. He muttered to himself, "Perfected Lord Guyu isn't afraid of the Shadow's sneak attack? Then how did your senior brother die back then?" Chapter 515. Was there any secret collusion between the Tiehu Immortal of the Heavenly Law Hall and the Devil Cult? Most people in the world probably didn't believe it. To be honest, even Perfected Lord Tianlan himself didn't think it was possible. Although there was an old saying that one could not know a man's heart from his face, and Tianlan, who was also a deity transformation stage lord and had great influence in Zhengxianmeng, actually knew some secrets about Tiehu Immortal that outsiders did not know. But even so, Lord Tianlan did not think that the old Tiehu would be so stupid, because it was not worth it, and there was no need for it. Before the rise of Lord Tianlan, Tiehu Immortal could be regarded as a leading figure in Zhengxianmeng. His fame, reputation, and strength were second to none. In addition, he had painstakingly maintained an upright image for many years, and had always been respected by the righteous cultivators in the world. At that time, it was not an exaggeration to say that he was respected by the whole world. However, talented people emerged in every generation. After true Lord Tianlan, who was much younger than him, entered the Union of True Immortals, he changed his image of a deity realm true lord who had been calm and steady for many years. He was determined to forge ahead, worked hard, and especially grasped the devil cult, which was a big threat to the evil sects that everyone in the world was very afraid of. He launched an unusually high-profile and fierce war, and became the leader of the pro-war faction in the Union of True Immortals, which was a huge organization, and quickly expanded his strength. He also established Fuyunji, recruited masters, and acted fiercely. He was unscrupulous in promoting talents to the devil cult, and catered to the wishes of a large number of young cultivators. He formed a sharp contrast with the other calm and prudent old immortals in Zhengxianmeng. Because of this, his power grew rapidly, and the more he fought, the stronger he became. In the end, he suppressed the devil cult outside, and subdued many halls inside, and became the new leader of the Zhengxianmeng generation in one fell swoop. Such a talented and bold man attracted the admiration and respect of many young people. However, at the same time, he also attracted the disdain and dissatisfaction of the older generation. Among them, the discord between Immortal Taihu and Immortal Tianlan was a secret known by everyone in Sky Dragon Mountain. Of course, they were all bigwigs with high status, so they had to keep up appearances. For example, when Immortal Tiehu held a ceremony to accept Lu Chen as his disciple previously, Immortal Tiehu still came. However, even though the two of them were secretly at odds with each other, and the house at the foot of the mountain was rumored to be related to Immortal Tiehu, But when true Lord Tianlan saw the house that was embroiled in a fierce battle from afar, he still did not believe that immortal Tiehu would really betray the good faction and collude with the evil cult. If the old man had such a thought, he would have discovered it long ago and used it as an excuse to put him to death. Indifferently and calmly, true Lord Tianlan thought about the various means of the other divine transformation stage true Lord. Suddenly, as if he had sensed something, he raised his head and glanced at the sky. The weather was fine today. There were clouds in the sky, but the clouds were a little thick. He stared at the thickest part of the clouds and frowned. The faces of Shueying and Luqian did not look too good. In any case, offending a divine transformation stage true Lord, even if it was unintentional, was a heavy psychological burden for ordinary cultivators. For many years, the status of divine transformation stage true lords in the vast cultivation world of the divine land had long been like that of a god, high above the masses and revered by tens of thousands of people. If at this time, the old divine transformation stage true lord of heaven's law hall suddenly arrived, flew into a rage, and even started a massacre, and the big backer behind Fuyunji did not arrive in time, then the situation would become very ugly and very dangerous. And the most troublesome thing was that everyone was in the Zhengxiameng system. There were almost no powerful means to restrict this kind of big shot. The most effective way was of course to have another divine transformation stage true lord come forward to confront him. This was also the reason why, for many years, in such a huge organization like Zhengxianmeng, there were all kinds of mountain factions, but in the end, almost all of them belonged to the forces of a few divine transformation stage true lords. Therefore, at this moment, what these two people were most concerned about was whether or not there were people from the evil cult in this house. If they caught the evil cult demon, then everything could be easily solved. The evidence was right there. Even Taihu true lord could not say much, and instead had to spend effort to exonerate himself. It should be known that Fuyunji was not a small hall without a backer. Behind it stood the current number one person in Zhengxianmeng, Tianlan true lord. Shueying had already passed down the order to tighten up the encirclement. No one must be allowed to escape. Killing people could be slow. The most important thing was to quickly confirm that the people resisting here were evil cult demons. But as the battle continued, the news that came out was not very optimistic. The resistance inside the house was very tenacious, and there were many experts hidden in this inconspicuous house. But what was more troublesome was that almost all of the people inside were of unknown origins. In other words, almost none of them had any marks or items related to the evil cult. And that so-called big shot, for the time being, had not been caught. Shueying waited for a while, and suddenly called over a person beside her to ask a few questions. That person then quickly left and entered the house. After a while he came back and directly walked to Shueying's side to reply. Shueying had no intention of hiding from Luqian, so that person did not lower his voice, so that Luqian and Old Ma beside him could hear his words. Actually, his reply was not complicated. He only told Shueying that he was still here, and that he was indeed with the main force, and was charging at the forefront. His attacks were ruthless and incomparably fierce, and he was even more hardworking than the people of Fuyunji. After that person finished speaking, he retreated. Shueying turned back to look at Luqian, who was expressionless. Instead, it was Old Ma who smiled, and with some intention of smoothing things over said, "That's not bad. At least it seems that he is not a problem. Let's see if we can catch that elder Gui later. I don't think it will be a big problem." Shueying frowned and said, "Let's talk about it after we catch him." As she said this, she turned back, looking a little impatient. Obviously, the sudden appearance of this matter that might involve true monarch Tiehu made her a little anxious. In comparison, Luqian was much calmer. At the same time, they heard the sounds of fighting in the house becoming louder and louder. It seemed that the battle had reached its most intense point, and the outcome was about to be decided. At this moment, suddenly, behind them, on the street that had been cleared by the people of Fuyunji, and on the street where all the unrelated people had been chased away, a figure suddenly appeared. Like a ghost, the figure appeared on the long street, and then walked towards them. The three of them turned their heads to look, and then their expressions changed slightly. The person who came was a young and beautiful woman with a charming appearance. It was true monarch Tiehu's adopted daughter Song Wenji. There were already people chasing after them, and their expressions were stern, as if they were about to attack. However, Song Wenji did not even look at the people behind her, and only walked towards Lu Chen's group. Moreover, her gaze only seemed to casually sweep over Shui Ying and Old Ma, and finally stopped on Lu Chen's face. Seeing that the Fuyunji guards chasing behind them were about to catch Song Wenji, Shui Ying suddenly frowned, and then waved her hand. The guards were startled for a moment, and then immediately obeyed and retreated. For a moment, many people on the long street looked over. They saw Song Wenji calmly walk in front of the three people. To be exact, among the three of them, she seemed to only pay attention to Lu Chen. She stood in front of Lu Chen, and then looked straight into Lu Chen's eyes. Her gaze seemed to be exceptionally clear and bright, and there wasn't any obvious hostility within it, causing Lu Chen to be unable to determine the reason for her arrival from her gaze and expression. He could only smile and say, "Miss Song, may I know why you've come here?" Song Wenji was silent for a moment, and then opened her mouth to say to Lu Chen, "This house is mine." Lu Chen coughed and said, "Then I'm sorry, we heard that there is an important figure of the devil cult hiding here, so?" Song Wenji suddenly interrupted him, and said, "You can do whatever you want, I don't care. It's just that in this house, there is a place where my deceased sister's memorial tablet is placed. Wenji sincerely asks senior brother Lu, do not disturb the peace of the deceased." After saying this, her eyes drooped, and her face showed some sorrow, but she sincerely bowed to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was immediately startled. Chapter 5:16. After standing in silence for a moment, Lu Chen did not directly reply to Song Wenji. Instead, he turned back to look at Shui Ying and Old Ma. The two of them had subtle expressions on their faces. Old Ma frowned while Shui Ying shook her head slightly. She looked a little unhappy. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, then reached out to help Song Wenji up. At this moment, he was so close to her that he could feel Song Wenji's extraordinary charm and beauty. Even someone as determined as him could not help but feel his heart tremble. Perhaps this was the so-called beauty of the world. The closer one was to her, the more they could not help but be attracted. Such a thought flashed across Lu Chen's mind, but he immediately suppressed those strange thoughts in his mind. His eyes became clear in the blink of an eye. He took half a step back and said in a low voice, "Miss Song, you said this house is yours? Then do you know what is happening inside?" Song Wenji's eyes fluttered as she glanced at the house. At this moment, there were all kinds of sounds of fighting and screams coming from inside. Even though she was blocked by the high walls, she could still feel the intense battle going on inside the house. Presumably, it was a scene of blood splattering everywhere. Song Wenji's expression changed slightly, as if she was hesitant. But in the end, she still said to Lu Chen, "This matter can't be hidden in the end, so I might as well tell you now. As for you people from Fuyunji," her voice paused, as if she did not know what to say for a moment. Lu Chen sighed in his heart. After staring at this charming woman for a moment, he said, "We received a secret report saying that the remnants of the evil sect, Elder Gui and the others, may be hiding in this house." Shui Ying and Old Ma stood to the side, their gazes also fixed on this woman, waiting to see what kind of reaction she would have after hearing these words. After hearing Lu Chen's words, Song Wenji's gaze dropped, her eyes drifting. It was unknown whether she was looking at the ground in front of her, or at Lu Chen's legs. However, the expression on her face did not seem to change, as if what Lu Chen had said just now had no effect on her. After a while, Song Wenji said calmly, "Senior Lu, I really do not know about this. I did ask someone to buy this house back then, but because it was a little inconvenient, I hit a corner in the middle. Of course, if you really want to investigate, these things can't be hidden from you, so I don't have anything to hide. But I really have nothing to do with the evil sect. I don't usually live here. I only arranged people to clean it from time to time. If there really are evil sect people inside, then there must be something wrong with the people guarding here." After hearing these words, Shui Ying and the others frowned. Shui Ying and Chen did not have any intention to speak. However, both Shui and Lu Chen did not say anything, and looked. Old Ma was a little helpless, but he could only cough and then said to Song Wenji, "Well, Miss Song, it's like this. Although you just explained it to me, this matter is of great importance, and it's really not good to just let it go." "And your explanation?" said Song Wenji. "To be honest, it's not easy to explain." Song Wenji's bright eyes flashed. She looked at Old Ma and said, "But what I said is the truth." Old Ma hesitated for a moment, then finally clenched his teeth and said, Chun, I have to ask you something. Please answer me truthfully." Song Wenji saw that he was serious and also became serious. "Please speak. You bought this house, but the money was paid for by your foster father? Was it Taihu Supreme who asked you to buy this house?" Song Wenji's expression suddenly changed. A hint of coldness appeared on her face. She did not answer immediately, but stared coldly at Old Ma. Old Ma's expression was the same as usual, as if he did not feel anything strange. However, he could faintly feel a trace of bitterness at the corner of his mouth. The atmosphere suddenly became somewhat stiff. For a moment no one spoke. After a while Song Wenji coldly said, "What do you mean by asking this question?" Old Ma smiled awkwardly and said, "This is something that must be asked. After all, you are Taihu Supreme's foster daughter. We have to clarify the relationship between you and him in this matter." Saying this, he couldn't help but add, "No other intention. No other intention would be absurd." The four people present all understood in their hearts that this question was so obvious. The meaning was obvious without asking. However, even though Song Wenji looked incomparably angry, she did not have the intention to act impulsively. She only silently stood there, coldly watching. Finally, she slowly said, "This matter has nothing to do with foster father." Probably this answer was exactly the same as what everyone had guessed she would say. That was why no one revealed any strange expressions. Instead, Lu Chun at this moment suddenly raised his eyebrows. His gaze passed over Song Wenji's shoulder and looked at the distant street. Suddenly, a tall and sturdy figure appeared. That shiny bald head waved at him from afar. After a moment, that person walked into a house by the roadside. Lu Chun hesitated for a moment and then said to Song Wenji, "Miss Song, you don't have to be anxious. We Fuyunji are here to capture the evil faction evil people. We will not purposely disturb your sister's memorial tablet. But this matter is of great importance. You are after all the owner of the house. Why don't you wait here for a moment?" As he spoke, he did not wait for Song Wenji's reply. It was as if he was certain that she would definitely stay here. He turned to Shui Ying and said, "Hall Master, I will have to trouble you to accompany Miss Song for a moment. Once the fighting inside is over, we will go in and see if there are any evil faction evil people. The result will be clear at a glance. We will decide how to deal with them at that time." After speaking, he turned to Old Ma and said, "You also wait here. I will be back soon." After speaking, he smiled at Song Wenji and walked straight into the distant street. Shui Ying frowned, as if somewhat puzzled. She wanted to say something but stopped. Song Wenji's expression changed. The three of them watched as Lu Chun walked into the distance. Then, for no reason, he turned a corner and walked directly into a house by the side of the street. Old Ma was startled and said, "What is he doing there?" Shui Ying and Song Wenji did not speak. After a moment, the two women looked at each other, and then turned to look at the house together, listening to the sounds of fighting that had already begun to die down. In the distance, Lu Chun pushed open the unlatched door and walked in. He closed the door behind him. The light in the house was somewhat dim. However, two figures could be seen standing in the house. One of them on the left was tall and burly with a shiny skull. Lu Chun glanced at him, then walked forward and bowed, saying, "Master." This person was naturally perfected Lord Tianlan. He smiled and nodded slightly as a form of greeting. Then Lu Chun turned to look at the other side. He saw the old man with white hair and beard standing there calmly. He hesitated for a moment and looked at true Lord Tianlan again. Seeing that there was no strange expression on this damn bald man's face, Lu Chun secretly cursed in his heart. Then, with a respectful smile on his face, he went forward and bowed to the old man, saying, "Disciple Lu Chun pays respect to true Lord Tiehu." Chapter 517. The sounds of fighting in the house finally calmed down. Although there were still a few screams and curses from time to time, they quickly stopped. It was unknown whether they were knocked unconscious or killed by blades and blood. On the long street outside the gate, the three people without Lu Qin became very quiet. No one spoke and the atmosphere was very stiff. However, after hearing the sounds gradually disappear, Shuang finally snorted and said, "Let's go in." After saying that, she was about to walk into the house. At this moment, Old Ma suddenly coughed and said, "Lu Qin has returned." Shui Ying and Song Wenji's footsteps paused and looked back. They saw that Lu Qin was indeed walking over from the distance. His figure was calm and his expression was calm. There seemed to be nothing strange about him. However, his eyes seemed to be faintly flickering, seemingly revealing some subtlety and strangeness. Shui Ying frowned and was about to speak when she suddenly sensed something. She glanced to the side from the corner of her eyes, and saw that although Song Wenji's expression was the same as usual, there seemed to be a faint feeling of relief. Shui Ying's expression changed and suddenly became somewhat cold. After a while, Lu Qin walked in front of them and swept his gaze across their faces. In the end, his gaze lingered on Song Wenji's charming and moving face for a little longer. He then said calmly, "This house was bought 2 years ago, right? The person who bought it was called Lu Hu." Song Wenji saw that Lu Qin seemed to be unable to say that name, and hurriedly answered. Lu Qin glanced at her and smiled bitterly. He nodded and said, "Yes, he's called Lu Hu, right? This person colluded with the devil cult, and his crime is unforgivable. He should have been caught in this house by now. Let's go in and take a look. When the time comes, we definitely can't let this person go." When these words were spoken, the expressions on the faces of the people present immediately changed, each with their own interesting expressions. Song Wenji let out a long sigh and smiled sweetly, as beautiful as a spring flower. Old Ma was dumbstruck, his face full of astonishment, and he looked as if he could not believe his own ears, while Shui Ying's reaction was the biggest. She was first surprised, then angry. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but then she snorted coldly, turned around, and walked away with a cold face. Lu Qin hurriedly took a few steps forward and rushed to Shui Ying's side. He whispered a few words to her, but Shui Ying did not seem to be satisfied. She did not even soften her voice. Instead, she angrily said, "Do you know how much risk we have taken? In the end, you let us go just like that?" With that, she strode forward again. Lu Qin frowned and grabbed her wrist. Shui Ying suddenly turned around, but before she could get angry, Lu Qin had already pulled her to the side, and then quickly whispered to her in an extremely low voice. Whether it was Song Wenji or Old Ma, they could not clearly hear what Lu Qin was saying at that moment. However, they could all see that the expression on Shui Ying's face was constantly changing, from anger and excitement at the beginning to loss and loss at the end. After a while, Lu Qin finished speaking and then gently let go of Shui Ying's wrist. With a slightly apologetic tone, he said, "In a moment of desperation, I have offended Hall Leader Shui. I am sorry." Shui Ying rubbed her wrist, but she did not seem to mind. She only closed her eyes slightly and revealed a bitter smile on her face. Then she said in a low voice, "We have fought so hard up front." Inside, she pointed in the direction of the large house to Lu Qin, and then said softly, "We do not know how many brothers in that house have been injured and lost their lives. But even so, is it still not comparable to a few casual words from the higher-ups?" Lu Qin was silent for a while, a sharp light flashing in the depths of his eyes. Then he said calmly, "Hall Leader Shui, you have been in this position for much longer than I have, and have seen far more of the world than I have. I believe this is not the first time you have seen something like this." He smiled and said, "Why make things difficult for me? I am only a small lackey to pass on the message." Shui Ying glanced at him. Her eyes seemed to have a profound meaning, but after a while, all the expressions on her face disappeared. The anger, excitement, loss, bitterness and unwillingness seemed to have suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, she seemed to have become that high and mighty woman who held great power. She nodded at Lu Qin and said, "I will naturally listen to the Lord True Monarch's orders." After saying this, she walked into the house that had already quietened down, but the smell of blood had begun to waft out. Lu Chen stood in the same place for a while, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw Old Ma and Song Wenji standing behind him. Lu Chen nodded at Old Ma and said, "Let's also go in and take a look." Old Ma agreed, and the two of them walked towards the house. However, they had only taken 2 steps when Lu Chen suddenly stopped and looked back with some confusion. He saw that Song Wenji was actually still behind him. "Why are you still following us?" Lu Chen said to her. "Did I say it very clearly just now? Us catching Lu who has nothing to do with you." Song Wenji nodded and said softly, "Yes, I understand. Thank you, senior brother Lu. Wenji is very grateful." Lu Chen sighed and said, "You don't need to thank me, I can't accept it. What I mean is, since you have nothing to do here, you don't need to go in. Otherwise, if other people saw you, wouldn't it be troublesome?" Song Wenji hesitated for a moment and said, "I understand that senior brother Lu is good to me. In fact, I have no intention of deliberately making things difficult for you. I just want to go in and take back my sister's memorial tablet and ashes. I don't want her to be disturbed after her death." She looked deeply at Lu Chen, and with a pleading expression, she bowed and said, "Wenji knows that this is an inappropriate request. I only hope that senior brother Lu can help me. After all, my sister used to be my only relative. She raised me with her own hands. I owe her a favor that I can't repay in this lifetime." Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. He looked back at Old Ma, but unexpectedly, Old Ma turned his head away and looked elsewhere as if nothing had happened. It was clear that he didn't want to get involved in this matter. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and looked at Song Wenji again. He saw that this woman was looking at him with an earnest face. Her eyes were as clear as a child's, and seemed to be shining with the light of desire and expectation. Was that the remnant light of her initial innocence? Was that the last bit of warmth in her memory? For some reason, Lu Chen couldn't bring himself to say the words that he should have refused. It was probably because he was thinking of the woman from many, many years ago, when his heart was still as hard as stone, and the woman whose face was already blurred in his memory. Finally he nodded and said softly, "All right, you come with me. After you find your sister's things, take them and leave quickly. Otherwise, if there are any accidents, I'm afraid you will also be in trouble." Song Wenji suddenly smiled. She looked very happy, gratified and happy. Her smile seemed to be as innocent as Lu Chen's, and there was no other meaning in his words. Chapter 518. Walking through the gate, they could feel the smell of blood thickening. There were no signs of a fierce fight in the front yard, but the further they walked, all kinds of bloodstains, collapsed doors and windows, broken stones, and even some bloodied corpses began to appear in their line of sight. It was obvious that this group of elites sent by Fuyunji did not have the slightest hesitation or mercy after receiving the order. Shuang was already walking in front, while Lu Chen and Old Ma walked behind with Song Wenji. In the middle, Lu Chen glanced at Song Wenji's expression from the corner of his eye, but found that this young and charming woman's expression was the same as usual, as if she was not affected by the surrounding scene at all. Perhaps because they had been together for more than 10 years, they had developed a tacit understanding. At this time, Old Ma turned to Song Wenji and said with a smile, "Miss Song, do you know these dead people next to you?" Song Wenji's expression did not change, and she did not hesitate to think. Very calmly she said, "I don't know. When I was introduced to Lu Hu, I felt that he could do things, so I let him take care of this place. I don't know anyone here. They were all recruited by Lu Hu. The only connection I have with this place is that my sister's memorial tablet is still here." Old Ma and Lu Chen looked at each other, nodded, and did not say anything. In fact, there was nothing to say. She had already pushed the blame so cleanly in one breath. What else could they pursue? If it was a normal day, they would naturally have many ways to pursue the matter, but at this moment, this beautiful woman had an even bigger backer behind her. So whatever she said, it was up to her. After walking for a while, Song Wenji opened her mouth and pointed in a direction, saying that her sister's memorial tablet was placed in a quiet room on the other side. Lu Chen then let Old Ma lead him there. Unexpectedly, Old Ma was unwilling, only saying that there were many things ahead, and his identity was different from Lu Chen's. Lu Chen could walk freely, but if old Ma slipped away halfway and was caught by some big shot in Fuyunji, he might suffer a lot. Lu Chen also felt a little helpless. Although he knew that old Ma's words were mostly evasive, he could not say that what he said was unreasonable, so he could only wave his hand and let him go. Song Wenji still needed someone to follow her. Although Lu Chen didn't know what Immortal Tiehu had said to the damn Baldi, or what kind of deal they had reached to make Immortal Tianlan let them off, he didn't dare to let Song Wenji act alone in this house as the matter was a little delicate. However, in the following time, it seemed that Lu Chen's worry was unnecessary. Song Wenji could not be more normal. From the beginning to the end, she was very obedient, walking with Lu Chen, never leaving Lu Chen's sight, and did not make any suspicious movements. They walked all the way to the quiet room she mentioned, and then under the gaze of Lu Chen, went in and took out a small urn and the wooden tablet of the memorial tablet. Lu Chen glanced at the wooden tablet, and looked at the row of words on it with a calm expression. Then he looked away and said calmly, "Have you got them?" Song Wenji nodded and said, "These are the two things." "Thank you, senior brother Lu. Wenji is very grateful." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You're welcome. Since you've got the things, it's not suitable for you to stay here for long in this bloody place, so you should leave first." Song Wenji replied with a "in," carried the small urn and the tablet and walked out. Lu Chen followed behind her. He had only walked a few steps when he suddenly saw a figure turning the corner in front of him. The figure was tall and slender, and the two of them immediately met. It was actually Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun also did not expect to meet the two of them here. Looking at Lu Chen and Song Wenji, and then her eyes also saw the few things in Song Wenji's arms, she could not help but was startled, and her face revealed a strange expression. Song Wenji's expression right now was calm, and seemed to have some sorrow. Seeing Su Qingjun, she did not have any change, only nodded to her and walked over. Lu Chen for a moment felt a headache, but the matter was right in front of him. After thinking about it, he still had to follow. When he passed by Su Qingjun, he softly said, "There are evil faction heretics here, be careful." Su Qingjun snorted, with some unhappiness on her face, lightly said, "When I was fighting with the evil faction heretics, I did not see you, so you came here." Lu Chen smiled bitterly, wanted to explain, but in the end he shook his head and walked over. And just like that, sent Song Wenji out of the house. After Song Wenji went out, she purposely stopped, turned and smiled at Lu Chen, and then said, "This time I really have to thank Lu senior brother for your help." Lu Chen said, "Don't mention it, our relationship as elders is there, it is what I should do." "Relationship?" Song Wenji muttered, suddenly laughed, but she quickly calmed down, bowed to Lu Chen and turned to leave. But after a few steps, she suddenly turned back and said to Lu Chen, "If you need me to explain to that sister Su, Lu Chen senior brother, feel free to tell me." Lu Chen rolled his eyes, sternly said, "There is no such thing. I walk straight and sit upright. An upright body is not afraid of crooked shadows. There is nothing to explain." After a pause he added, "Oh, that Su Qingjun and I actually do not have any special relationship. Don't think too much, so as not to hurt her reputation." Song Wenji smiled. She didn't say anything and just floated away. Lu Chen looked at her back for a while, then turned around and walked back into the house. When he passed by the intersection, he purposely looked at the place where they had met, only to see that it was empty. There was no one there. At this time, there were basically no sounds of fighting in the house, but all kinds of noises and shouts were much more than before, rising and falling, gathering in the backyard of the house, occasionally accompanied by a few screams, but they quickly disappeared. Lu Chen quickened his pace and walked towards the backyard. The stench of blood in the air was getting thicker and thicker, and along the way, there were corpses strewn all over the place. Just as he was about to see the gate to the backyard, he suddenly heard a loud noise in front of him, as if many people were exclaiming in unison, and then excited voices could be heard. "Here, here. There is a secret door, quickly open it. No hurry, be careful of the traps, surround the surroundings first. Where is the trap master? Quickly come and take a look. Hurry, hurry. It's open, it's open. Ah, eh." Suddenly, a scream came from that direction. The voice was mournful, followed by a loud shout. Be careful, there is someone inside. Someone is hiding inside. Is it a big fish? It is not a big fish, maybe it is a big turtle. Finally, someone suddenly said, and the backyard suddenly became silent. After a moment, suddenly there was a burst of laughter, with endless joy, gratification, and excitement. Chapter 519. Even though they were far away, the cheers from the mansion could be faintly heard from the end of the long street. Ordinary people could not hear it clearly, but for divine transformation stage perfected cultivators, as long as they paid attention, they would naturally know what was going on. In the dim room, perfected Lord Tianlan and perfected Lord Tiehu had already sat down. When there were no outsiders present, the two of them seemed to be much more casual. They did not really care whether they were sitting on an ordinary wooden chair or a throne or a lotus seat in one of the lofty palaces on Sky Dragon Mountain. However, the room was still very quiet. Neither of them spoke, and it was precisely because of this that the burst of cheers sounded a little clearer. After a while, perfected Lord Tiehu suddenly broke the silence and said, Do you think that the person we caught is Elder Ghost? Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a while, then shook his head and said, Probably not. If that guy was caught so easily, he wouldn't have been able to hide from us for decades in the Immortal City. Perfected Lord Tiehu nodded slowly, seemingly agreeing with perfected Lord Tianlan's words. After a while, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside the room. The two important figures in the room did not seem to have any reaction. After a while, the footsteps stopped outside the door. And then someone knocked lightly on the unlatched door 3 times. Come in, perfected Lord Tiehu said. The wooden door was pushed open with a creak, and Song Wenji walked in. She first called perfected Lord Tiehu godfather, then turned her head and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. Even though he was just sitting, perfected Lord Tianlan's tall and sturdy figure was still very astonishing. At first glance, he seemed to be slightly taller than the petite Song Wenji. At the same time, this bald perfected lord had an extremely imposing manner. He was not angry, but his eyes were as deep as the sea, and seemed to contain wind and thunder. He really was like a god. Song Wenji did not know if she was intimidated by the imposing manner of the number 1 person in Zhangxianmeng, but there was a strange expression on her face. She seemed to be afraid, but at the same time, she seemed to be worshipping and admiring him. Perhaps this was the common emotion that every ordinary person had when facing the gods and Buddhas. Even the practitioners with cultivation were no exception. She respectfully bowed to perfected Lord Tianlan and said softly, Disciple Wenji pays respect to perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm. His gaze lingered on the charming woman for a moment before he nodded. Get up. Yes. Song Wenji stood up and silently walked to the side of Supreme Tiehu. She stood a step behind him. After a while, she could not help but lift her eyes and look at Supreme Tianlan, who was not far away. When Song Wenji walked in, she was still holding her deceased sister's ashes and memorial tablet. However, both Supreme Tiehu and Supreme Tianlan did not care about this. Only Supreme Tiehu asked her lightly, How is it in the house? Did anyone make things difficult for you? Song Wenji replied, Many people died. They are trying to catch the demons of the devil sect. Senior brother Lu Chen treated me very well. He followed Lord True Monarch Tianlan's instructions and protected me. He even agreed to some of my unreasonable requests and even personally escorted me out. True Monarch Tiehu nodded and glanced at True Monarch Tianlan. True Monarch Tianlan smiled and said, I was right? That kid is reliable. Supreme Tiehu snorted and said, He is very good. But I thought you would tell Shuang. I didn't expect you to only look for your own disciple. Are you really going to train a successor? Standing beside Supreme Tiehu, Song Wenji lowered her gaze. But after hearing this, a ray of light flashed across her eyes, and she quickly calmed down. Supreme Tianlan smiled and said, If I don't train him, why would I take him in as a disciple? As for you, old Tiehu, although you have taken in quite a few disciples these years, I know you are not particularly satisfied with them. Now that you're old, could it be that you want to pass on your legacy to your goddaughter? Steelpot True Lord sneered, rolled his eyes and said, "You talk too much. How I decide on this matter has nothing to do with you." Supreme Tianlan laughed and pointed at Song Wenji. "Let's not talk about other things. This little girl's aptitude is top-notch. She looks good. How about this? If you don't want to marry her, I will ask for your hand in marriage and betroth her to my disciple, Lu Chen. How about that?" Once these words were spoken, the room immediately became silent. Both Taihu deity and Song Wenji revealed a stunned expression. The only difference was, Taihu deity looked surprised with some anger, while Song Wenji, with a perfect amount of shyness, in the deepest part of her eyes, a trace of sadness gently flashed past. After a while, Supreme Tiehu snorted and waved his hand to reprimand. "Don't give me that. Don't think that you can push your luck just because you have the upper hand today. Let me tell you, Wenji is my most beloved daughter. She's a priceless treasure to me. Even if you give me the most precious treasure in the world, I won't do it. Not to mention giving her back to your disciple as his wife. You'd better give up on this idea." Supreme Tianlan shook his head and smiled. He turned to look at Song Wenji and said, "You are really stingy. You talk big, but why don't you listen to what the little girl is thinking? What if she likes my disciple?" As he said this, he drew a big circle in front of him and said with a smile, "Little girl, let me tell you, in the future, all my properties may be passed on to Lu Chen. If you marry him, you won't have to worry about anything for the rest of your life. How about it? Are you willing?" Supreme Tiehu looked a little annoyed, but he seemed to have thought of something. He turned his head and looked at Song Wenji suspiciously, saying, "Wenji, what are you thinking?" Song Wenji bit her lips and knelt down in front of Supreme Tiehu. She said, "Godfather, you have done so much for me. Without you, there would be no Wenji. Wenji has no request. I only wish to serve Godfather for the rest of my life. I only hope that Godfather will take pity on me and not drive me away. Otherwise, I can only be a lonely soul with no one to rely on." At the end of her words, her shoulders trembled and her body trembled. She seemed to be crying, as if she was very sad. Supreme Tiehu was shocked. He quickly stood up and helped Song Wenji up. Her face was full of tears, like a pear blossom in the rain. True monarch Taihu's face revealed a pained expression as he said, "Why did you do this? Why did you do this? My dear daughter, don't cry. I have no such intention, no such intention." As he said that, he turned around and glared at perfected Lord Tianlan, saying angrily, "You're a perfected lord after all. How dare you spout such frivolous words to scare my obedient daughter?" True Lord Tianlan stared deeply at True Lord Tiehu, only to see him hurriedly comforting the crying Song Wenji. His expression was anxious, and he did not have the bearing of a spirit-severing true lord at all. Supreme Tianlan was amused. He let out a sigh of relief and apologized with a smile. He then stood up and walked out of the house, leaving the godfather and goddaughter alone. True Lord Tianlan looked at the sky as he stood on the long street. Then he looked at the bustling house in the distance, and the sounds of fierce fighting that once again rang out. He also heard the comforting words coming from the house behind him. A deep smile appeared on his face. With his hands behind his back, he looked up at the sky. At that moment, he felt that all the living beings in the world were probably just mediocre people. With a flip of the palm, the clouds and rain were overturned. There were few difficult things in the world. Chapter 520. Lu Chen saw the secret door. It was in the back garden of the mansion, under a rockery. It seemed to have blended in with the surrounding rocks and plants. It was almost flawless, and ordinary people would not be able to discover it at all. But it was a pity that the group of people who surrounded this place today were not ordinary people. In the long history of fighting with the devil sect, Fuyunji had long developed from an unknown small sect of Zhengxianmeng to a huge, terrifying, and even somewhat abnormal powerful organization. In the Fuyun division, apart from the most famous cultivator assassins and the ever-present and mysterious shadow, there were also all kinds of talents, including astronomy, geography, metaphysics, mechanisms, geomancy, and so on. They had everything you could think of. On such an important day, and also in the immortal city where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng and Fuyunji were located, there was no lack of talents. Therefore, this ingeniously hidden secret door did not hide for long before it was discovered by the people in Fuyunji who specialized in this field. At this moment, the fighting in other places in the house had basically stopped. Although the situation was tragic, blood splattered everywhere, corpses were everywhere, but the winner was undoubtedly Fuyunji. In the Immortal City, if there was an open battle, the forces that wanted to fight against Zhang Xianmeng and Fuyunji was tantamount to a fool's dream, seeking their own death. As a result, the people of the Floating Clouds Agency had already filled up this back garden. At a glance, one could see a dense crowd of cultivators. Countless of them held blood-stained weapons, and their bodies were covered in blood. Their expressions were either solemn, excited, or ferocious. They all had blood-stained smiles on their faces as they surrounded the secret door. The so-called unable to escape even if given wings was probably like this. The entrance of the secret room was very narrow. This was also a common characteristic of most secret rooms in the world, although there were many people in Fuyunji, but due to the terrain they could not swarm in. Probably because of this, until now, the people in the secret room were still stubbornly resisting. Fuyunji's men rushed in a few times, but the resistance from the people inside was unusually fierce. They managed to repel them several times. Even though they knew that the outside was already surrounded, the people inside didn't seem to have any intention of surrendering. Perhaps they felt that even if they surrendered, there wouldn't be a better result? Although this made the people of Fuyunji a little angry, a few of the leaders revealed a trace of joy in their eyes. It seemed that they had indeed blocked a big fish this time. After fighting for a while longer, Fuyunji's attacks were repelled twice, and some of their players were injured. This time, the expressions of Xue Ying and the others turned somewhat ugly. Lu Chen also walked to her side and said softly, "Don't think too much. If he wanted to die, he would have killed himself long ago. Just use those methods on him and force him out." Xue Ying pondered for a moment and nodded. She casually waved her hand and summoned a nearby subordinate. Then she whispered a few orders and the subordinate immediately turned and ran away. After that, Xue Ying acted as if nothing had happened. She whispered in a voice that only Lu Chen could hear, "Is the true lord outside?" "Yes, he's outside watching," Lu Chen said. "Oh," Xue Ying responded, seeming to let out a sigh of relief. Lu Chen smiled at her and didn't say anything else. Not long after, there was a commotion in the crowd in front of them. After a while, it seemed like someone shouted a few words. Then there was a rustling sound, and an empty space appeared in the middle of the crowd, which happened to be near the secret door. Then 4 or 5 people walked up, each holding a large lump of something in their hands. They slowly walked to a place not far from the door of the secret room. The secret room was silent, and the atmosphere seemed to be somewhat tense. Someone in the crowd suddenly laughed. Then, as if it was contagious, this hearty and mocking laughter suddenly rang out everywhere, vaguely carrying a hint of tyranny. After a while, among the people at the door of the secret room, one of them acted first. He quickly threw 5 or 6 black ball-shaped objects into the secret room from a distance. There was an angry roar in the secret room. But very quickly, almost in the blink of an eye, this angry roar was drowned out by a violent explosion. A blazing flame suddenly lit up, and the orange flame even rushed out of the secret door halfway. A wave of heat rolled and drifted, making it even more difficult to imagine the scene in the secret room. Xue Ying and Lu Chen's expressions didn't change, as if they didn't have any emotions. But when Lu Chen turned to look, he found that among the Fuyunji experts in the crowd in front, about half of them had happy smiles on their faces. It was probably because of this that Lu Chen quickly found a girl in the crowd who didn't fit in with the others. Su Qingjun stood in the crowd, frowning slightly. She stared at the flames in the secret room for a moment, then gritted her teeth and turned her head away. Then, as if she felt something, she looked in Lu Chen's direction and saw Lu Chen staring at her. Su Qingjun was startled, but in the end, she didn't say anything. She just silently walked backwards. There were no miserable screams coming from the secret room that was filled with flames. After a while, this caused the surrounding Fuyunji people to feel a little restless. Xue Ying snorted and waved her hand again, as if she was giving an order. The people in front of the door immediately moved, taking turns to walk forward, and then very skillfully threw the things in their hands into the secret room. Thus, in this lonely and despairing secret room, apart from the raging flames, there was also poisonous water, bone-corroding black sand, floating poisonous gas that could rot from the mouth to the lungs, and other things that could make one's scalp go numb and die a horrible death. Seeing this, even the gratified and happy laughter in the surroundings slowly quieted down. Everyone stared at the secret door that no one had rushed out of until now, their faces gradually showing expressions of disbelief. "That's right, do you keep a dog?" Behind the crowd, Lu Chen suddenly asked Xueying this somewhat incomprehensible question. Xueying was startled for a moment, and looked at Lu Chen with some surprise, then said, "No, why?" "Oh," Lu Chen said. "It's nothing. I just wanted to tell you that Sir Iron Pot True Monarch is magnanimous. After I personally asked him, he agreed to take back the dog prohibition order." Xueying was a little speechless and didn't know what to say for a moment. What did this dog prohibition order have to do with today's matter? Right at this moment, an angry roar suddenly came from the deathly silent secret chamber. A moment later, the stone walls around the secret chamber's entrance instantly exploded, shooting out witchcraft gravel and exploding in all directions. In the midst of the chaos, a black silhouette mixed in the gravel shot up into the sky, but it was escaping towards the sky. Lu Chen and Xueying raised their heads and glanced at the sky, but their bodies didn't move at all. The sky was clear and bright, but in the next moment, the sky suddenly darkened. It was as if a hand had suddenly covered the sky, and there was no peace. Chapter 521. Covering the sky with one hand. A palm really fell from the sky. It was unimaginably huge, covering the sky and the sun. It was as if at that moment, not only the back garden, but the entire house, the long street outside, and even the nearby large area of the immortal city had suddenly darkened. It was like the wrath of the gods in heaven, with a ruthless and unparalleled power, descending from the sky and suppressing everything. The black shadow that soared into the sky from the back garden suddenly lost all escape routes, and was faced with endless darkness. And on the ground, all the Fuyunji experts who had reacted at the first moment, and were ready to fly up and intercept the escaping black shadow, at this moment, one by one, stopped in their tracks and looked up at the sky with awe. That tall and burly figure that was like a god unknowingly, was already standing in the sky, at the peak of the clouds, looking down at the world, high and mighty. The black shadow that originally soared into the sky with a trace of desperation and madness, fell into a predicament where there was no way forward or retreat. There was no way up to the sky, and no way down to the ground. In the last moment of despair, he let out a long roar, and used all his strength to collide with the giant palm that was descending from the sky. The wind and clouds suddenly became urgent. The wind whistled from all directions, and the dark clouds in the sky rolled. Suddenly, there was a sound of thunder, and a bolt of lightning that tore the sky apart appeared between the fingers of the giant palm. Like a long white snake, it slithered on the giant palm, and then revealed a ferocious and disdainful grin at the black shadow that was rushing towards it. In an instant, the light of the lightning flourished, and the heaven and earth were silent. The giant palm came crashing down, bringing with it rolling wind and thunder, and slapped on the black shadow that soared into the sky. There was only a roar, and there seemed to be a wave of air that instantly burst forth in midair, and immediately rushed towards the surroundings like a huge wave. The giant palm lifted slightly, and paused in midair for a moment. And under the shadow of the giant palm, the black shadow, as if it had suffered a heavy blow, its entire body flew backwards, like a falling stone, flying diagonally faster and faster. In a short moment, it heavily smashed onto the ground, making a loud sound, and then there was a burst of rustling sounds. The black shadow couldn't control its momentum at all. It tumbled on the ground, smashing through 3 or 4 houses, and even leaving a deep mark on the ground. If it was an ordinary person, they would have been smashed into smithereens. However, reality was not like that. But under such a terrifyingly powerful palm, no matter how high the black figure's cultivation was, he was instantly defeated. He fell in the ruins and never got up again. The experts of the Floating Clouds Agency, who were originally in the back garden, rushed over. In just a few moments, they had surrounded the black figure. All kinds of dazzling techniques were used, and in an instant, the black figure was suppressed to the point where he couldn't move at all. With that, the outcome was set. The final thief was finally caught. The members of the Floating Clouds Agency all revealed excited smiles. Even more people raised their heads to look at the sky. When they looked at the godlike figure high up in the sky, their faces revealed expressions of reverence. And the bald, burly man above the clouds, at this moment, his expression was calm. He only indifferently glanced at the chaotic situation on the ground, then slowly raised his eyes and looked towards the distant horizon. He frowned slightly, as if thinking about something. On the ground, Shui Ying and Lu Chun, who stood behind the crowd, didn't rush up to surround and interrogate the black figure like the others. Instead, they stood there without moving, their expressions a little strange. After a moment, they seemed to look at each other at the same time, but didn't speak. They just stood there silently. Lu Chun also frowned slightly. This black figure's cultivation was profound and his strength was valiant. He was a strong enemy that was difficult to deal with. But if everyone's target was the Ghost Elder who had fought with Supreme Tianlan and Fuyunji in the Immortal City for decades, it seemed to be a little weak. Was the Ghost Elder only at this level? Or could it be that this time, that crafty and treacherous old turtle was once again hiding in some dark corner, continuing his evil deeds? The battle between the evil cult and the Fuyunji was still not over. It was still going to continue painfully like this. In the underground city that was shrouded by the blood-red brilliance of the blood moon, Supreme Guyu expressionlessly walked out from the big house. Standing at the door, he paused for a moment, as if he sensed something. He raised his head and glanced at the sky. What entered his eyes was a strange blood moon that was surrounded by red light and shadows. But his gaze didn't seem to stop at that thing. After pausing on the blood moon for a moment, he looked further away. Passing through the blood moon was a solid and thick rock wall. And further away was the ground of the human world. That place seemed to be another world. And above it was a layer of real sky. The wind and clouds swirled. The person whose power shook the four directions was standing above the 9 heavens. Supreme Guyu's expression at this moment became somewhat complicated. He seemed to be deep in thought, and then quietly sat down on the stone steps at the door. In the huge city, on the long and empty streets, there was only his figure, looking like a lone shadow, extremely lonely. The blood light floated, sprinkled on his body, and also into the house behind him. In the backyard separated by a wall, in the dried-up well, a shadow hidden in the deepest part of the darkness slowly moved. He raised his head and glanced at that small well, and heaved a long sigh of relief. Then he seemed to hesitate, but in the end he still stood up, using his hands and feet to pat the hard walls of the well. His entire body then quietly climbed up the well wall. There was no sound of wind as the figure moved, no movement at all. This black figure silently and slowly climbed to the mouth of the dry well. The blood moon in the sky sprinkled down blood-red light, onto the well, onto his body. The red light floated up and down, like waves in a blood ocean, clustered his figure in the light and shadow. That black shadow let out a low sigh of satisfaction, deeply breathed in this air that even the smell seemed to carry the stench of blood, and then looked up at the blood moon in the sky, and slowly poked his head out. In the red blood light, the face that poked out of the well was impressively a sinister mask. Only the 2 eye sockets were 2 holes, and 2 dark red lights could be seen flickering in them. Not far away, outside the door separated by a wall, Supreme Guyu also quietly sat, looking up, as if he did not feel anything. In that small house on the long street of the Immortal City, the doors and windows were opened. Tai Hu Tru and Song Wenji stood in front of the window, and saw the entire scene in the sky. When the gigantic palm with unparalleled power defeated the black shadow that soared to the sky, True Lord Tiehu frowned, while Song Wenji, who was standing beside him, revealed a complicated expression. A trace of reverence first appeared in the depths of her eyes. Perhaps that was the feeling of every cultivator when facing such a powerful force that stood at the peak of the human cultivation world. Then, she revealed a trace of worry, and turned to look at Supreme Tai Hu Tru. Supreme Tai Hu Tru seemed to feel the worried gaze of his goddaughter, and turned to her, forcing a smile. Song Wenji was a little hesitant, but finally said in a low voice, "Godfather, Supreme Tianlan he is very strong." Supreme Tai Hu Tru was silent for a moment, and suddenly sneered, his face revealing an arrogant expression, and said, "Not bad, but at my level, who can not do this? This person is frivolous, and purposely wants to show off to the world, for an undeserved reputation, and is only SOSO. After speaking, he turned and walked away. Song Wenji took one last look at the figure in the sky outside the house. The corner of her mouth slightly revealed an imperceptible smile, and hurriedly followed Supreme Tai Hu Tru. Chapter 522. Chun-hee, who was in the crowd, squeezed through the people around him and walked out. His face was ashen as he turned to look at his surroundings. He quickly found Xue Ying and Lu Chun, who were standing behind the crowd and had not come over to join in the fun. He stood where he was and hesitated for a moment. Then he walked over with an ugly expression. He even had to take a deep breath to calm himself down before saying to the two of them in a deep voice, "That is not Elder Gue." Xue Ying and Lu Chun looked at him, and did not say anything. After a moment of silence, Chun-hee said, "That person is called Fan Tue. He is the leader of the demon sect in the Western continent. He has been doing well over the years, and is highly regarded by Elder Gue. He was deployed to the Celestial City with the intention of nurturing and putting him in an important position." Chun-hee did not finish his sentence because the outcome was right before his eyes. Clearly, this high-ranking member of the demon sect, Fan Tue, was very unlucky. It was an important opportunity for him to achieve meteoric success. However, he had coincidentally encountered a series of heavy blows to the demon sect from Fuyunji. It was naturally impossible for him to achieve his ambitions now. He was even forced to hide here and was eventually captured alive. It could be said that he was unlucky. However, there was no joy on the faces of Lu Chun and Xue Ying. The two of them looked at each other, and saw a hint of worry and disappointment in their eyes. Their most important and biggest target, Elder Gue, who was the key to completely destroying the demon sect, where was he hiding? Could it be that this sinister and cunning enemy, who had fought with the people of Fuyunji for decades, would still be pestering Zheng Xianmeng in the Celestial City? Even though perfected Lord Tianlan had clearly held back and did not kill Fan Tue, it was not easy to fall into the hands of a divine transformation stage perfected lord, someone who had the power to be Zheng Xianmeng, or even the most powerful person in the world. Fan Tue faced this divine transformation stage perfected lord head-on, and was defeated on the spot. Even though he did not die on the spot, his internal organs were shaken and his meridians were in a mess. He fainted on the spot, and remained unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. During this period, Fuyunji had brought people back to Mount Tianlong. Of course, it was not just Fan Tue. There were also other demons from the demon sect that were captured in the house. Harboring evildoers of the devil cult was a serious crime. Of course, the owner of the house had to be held accountable, because it was very likely that the owner of the house was inextricably linked to the devil cult. He might even be a member of the devil cult. Due to various reasons, the original owner of the house disappeared from sight, and all the blame was placed on a man named Lu Hu. Everyone soon discovered that this man had died in that fierce battle in a corner of the house. Then everything was perfect. The only and had not had the demon sect and had and had had and had had and had and had. In the end, the demon sect was still weak. Given the situation, those who had escaped would not be able to overturn the situation. After this vigorous but peaceful encirclement, peace was restored on Mount Tianlong. After all, without capturing Elder Ghost, it could not be said that the evil cult had been completely destroyed. Therefore, the original days were still going on as usual. At most, there were more people in the prison who were prepared to interrogate and investigate. However, in Zheng Xianmeng there were still some changes that were discovered. The relationship between the two major factions in Zheng Xianmeng, the Heavenly Law Hall and Fuyunji, seemed to have eased recently. Although the two high and mighty perfected cultivators in the divinity transformation stage did not show up and directly say anything, Smart people and conscientious people were the last things that were lacking in such a powerful organization as Zhengxianmeng. They had been paying attention to the situation in the Alliance of Immortals all the time, carefully searching for every opportunity and trend that might affect them. And for so many years, the news in Zhengxianmeng could not be completely kept secret. Everyone felt that it was like a sieve that leaked information everywhere. In fact, it was indeed a sieve. Speaking of which, it was a very interesting thing. Even if one was as strong as a perfected lord of the soul formation stage, even if his name shook the world and his prestige shook the celestial city, no matter how strong he was or how powerful he was still powerless against things like rumors. This was probably the reason why the human heart could never be controlled. But fortunately, there were too many smart people in this world. Since they could not control the rumors, they would instead add vinegar to the rumors and release more confusing words that made it difficult to distinguish between truth and falsehood. Naturally, they could also make people confused and at a loss for what to do. Therefore, during this period of time, Mount Celestial Dragon looked peaceful, but the rumors in private were like waves, coming wave after wave. Today, it was the Fuyun division that suffered a great loss and was fooled by Elder Ghost, so they didn't manage to catch the culprit. Tomorrow, it was the true Lord Tianlan's ingenious plan and meticulous arrangement that defeated the last force of the devil cult in the celestial city in one fell swoop. The day after that, there was someone who stood out and said with certainty that the reason why this battle was so successful was because True Lord Tai Hu and True Lord Tianlan disregarded their former enmity and cooperated with each other sincerely. As expected, these few deity realm true lords were all great figures who cared about the world and placed the righteous path of the world above all. The rumors were like a mess of flowers, clouding people's eyes. It was hard to distinguish between truth and falsehood. But during this period of time, it was true that perfected Lord Tai Hu did not open his mouth to criticize or berate Fuyunji. Those who thought that the two factions had reconciled also used this as evidence. But in this chaos, there was a small matter that did not attract attention. At most, it was a piece of news that people found a little strange, and then forgot about after hearing it. It was said that perfected Lord Tai Hu had passed down an order to withdraw the dog ban that was previously issued. Most of the cultivators in the world did not keep dogs. Very few cultivators who kept pets had to keep all kinds of different kinds of strange birds and beasts. The remaining number was really pitiful. So when this dog ban was first issued, although it was surprising, it did not cause too much controversy in the celestial city. Everyone treated it as if it did not exist. But now that it was suddenly cancelled, everyone just listened and laughed. Most people did not care, and just thought that it was a sudden impulse of that perfected Lord Tai Hu. In any case, if you cultivated to the realm of perfected Lord of Deity transformation, of course you would be qualified to do this. However, only 4 people in this world knew that the reason why perfected Lord Tai Hu did this was because that day in the small house on the long street, after perfected Lord Tianlan and perfected Lord Tai Hu had reached an agreement on all the conditions, Lu Chen suddenly and very politely added this condition to perfected Lord Tai Hu. This suggestion seemed a little rude and unnecessary, but that was what Lu Chen said. And the strange thing was, perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to agree very much. Before perfected Lord Tai Hu lost his temper, he smilingly included this request in his own request, and also suppressed perfected Lord Tai Hu's temper. So in the end, this huge pursuit ended silently. There was not much change in Lu Chen's life. The only one who benefited the most was a strong black dog. On that day, the black dog was released and no longer restrained by anyone. It stood in front of the Kunlun temple with a proud and ecstatic expression, barking wildly outside for the whole morning. It was said that the entire Sky Dragon Mountain could hear the dog's barking. Later, the black dog was kicked out of the Kunlun temple by perfected Lord Tianlan, and was not allowed to enter again. Chapter 523. Although they did not manage to catch Elder Ghost in that arrest, but this operation was still like giving the evil faction, which was already on its last breath, a heavy stab, stabbing into the heart, hurting into the bones. From that day onwards, The ghost-like shadow that had been floating in the immortal city for many years finally quieted down. There was no more movement about the evil sect, nor any news related to Elder Ghost. Everything seemed to have sunk into the water, into the darkness, and from then on, there was no more sound. Most of the people thought that the evil sect's power was gone, and there was no turning back. Shui-ing, Lu-chen, Old Ma, and that Chun-He who sought refuge all thought so. All the power was wiped out, even if Elder Ghost was still on the run, even if he still had a little possibility to stir up some waves in the future. But to rebuild the evil sect in front of such a powerful Zhangxianmeng was still too difficult. Sky Dragon Mountain calmed down. Of course, that was only on the surface. In the era of prosperity, the undercurrent under the huge organization would never stop. There would always be all kinds of things happening. After eliminating the foreign enemies, it was time for everyone to plot against each other for their own interests. No, it could even be said that this era had already arrived. Everyone was already very familiar with the open and veiled struggles. The only difference was that in the past there was still Fuyunji. Because of the persistence of Lord Tianlan and some other reasons, he kept chasing and biting the evil sect like a mad dog. Relying on Lord Tianlan's rare talent, relying on Fuyunji's growing strength, and all kinds of ruthless and decisive methods, the evil sect was slowly suppressed, and Zhangxianmeng won the reputation of the world. Now it was a new era. It was time to do something else. For example, they would stab their partners who were also allies of the Immortal Alliance and the Righteous Path with a smile, snatch their business, curse them, spread rumors, and then criticize them righteously. In the end, once they gained power, they would kill their friends. Finally, this era had arrived. Have you been waiting for this day for a long time? Or have you been resisting for this day to come? That day, when Lu Chen and Lord Tianlan were chatting in the Kunlun Hall, he asked him directly. Lord Tianlan thought for a while, then said with indifference and arrogance, "Never thought about it. Anyway, with my current achievements, it should be others who plot against me, right?" Lu Chen did not believe a word he said. "Nonsense, I don't believe you when you say you don't plot against others." Lord Tianlan laughed and said, "Brat, can't you say something nice?" Lu Chen said, "Oh, Master is kind, humble, and gentle. You should be careful of the people in the Celestial Alliance who have evil intentions and want to harm you. You can't underestimate them." Lord Tianlan clapped and smiled, nodded and said, "Well said." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said after pondering for a moment, "What should we do next?" Lord Tianlan said, "That old tortoise is hiding somewhere right now and refuses to come out no matter what. It's indeed hard to find, but we can't just give up. Don't bother about this for now and leave it to Shui-ing and Fuyunji." Lu Chen nodded. Lord Tianlan continued, "I have something important that I need your help with, and it has to be you." When Lu Chen saw Lord Tianlan retract his smile and turn solemn at this point, he could not help but be stunned. He sat up straight and nodded. "What is it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced out of the hall and saw Mount Sky Dragon standing tall and majestic under the clear skies. He narrowed his eyes slightly with a deep gaze. After a moment he said, "Make a trip back to Kunlun on my behalf." The forest was quiet and the wind blew through the majestic mountain. In the quiet hall in the afternoon, there was only a soft and low voice that floated in the hall. It was like a strand of lonely wind that lingered and didn't fade away, and it was telling a secret that no one knew. Atsu lay lazily under the shade of a tree outside of Kunlun's hall. Its dog eyes were half closed, and it looked like it was dozing off. However, when a familiar voice came from afar, Atsu's body quivered, and he immediately opened his eyes. His eyes were bright, and his drowsiness disappeared without a trace. Lu Chen stood on the stone steps and smiled at it, waving his hand. Atsu jumped up and ran over while barking. It rushed to Lu Chen's side and rubbed its head against his body intimately. Lu Chen patted its head and looked back at the majestic Kunlun's hall thoughtfully. A complicated expression appeared on his face. After a moment, Lu Chen said, "Let's go, Atsu. We're going on a long trip." Since they were going on a long trip, it was impossible for them to leave just like that. Lu Chen first returned to his residence and tidied up before leaving for Fuyunji. It had been a long time since Atsu had followed him like this. However, This black dog did not seem to be unfamiliar to him. It ran back and forth and sniffed around just like before. Lu Chen arrived at Fuyunji's hall and asked someone to inform him. Not long after, he saw Shuang. Shuang smiled when she saw him and said, "I haven't been here for a while. Let me tell you about catching Elder Gui. That old turtle is really cunning. I really don't know where he is hiding. However, we didn't come out empty-handed. 3 days ago." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand. "Hallmaster Shui, you can make the decision on this matter. I won't interfere. When it comes to dealing with the demonic cult, no one in the world can beat you. Even when Master ordered me to come over a while ago, it was just to help you from the side and help you balance the relationship with the new experts of the Kunlun party." Shuang was slightly startled. Her smile became even sweeter. She covered her mouth and said, "What are you saying? When did you learn to flatter?" Lu Chen laughed heartily and said, "Of course not. Oh right, I came here today to say hello to Hall Master. The cultivation method that Master passed on to me is quite difficult. In the next few days, I have to go into seclusion in Kunlun's hall. I'm afraid that I can't manage the affairs of the outside world for a while. I can only come and trouble Hall Master Shui." Shuang raised her eyebrows. She then nodded and said, "I see. Cultivation is the duty of us cultivators. Your future is boundless. You carry the expectations of the monarch, so of course you have to put this matter first. As for the other mundane matters, let me handle them. You can rest assured and cultivate." Lu Chen smiled and cupped his hands. "Thank you very much." The two of them chatted for a while and handed over some of the chores during the conversation. Lu Chen then took his leave, turned a corner, and found Old Ma again. He told him exactly what he had said. Old Ma looked very envious. He smiled and said, "Go and cultivate well. Maybe when you come out of seclusion, you will amaze the world with a single brilliant feat." Lu Chen smiled and said, "How can that be possible? Anyway, buy more wine when the time comes. Let's drink together." Old Ma laughed and agreed. Lu Chen left with Atsu. Along the way, intentionally or unintentionally, he passed by the outside of Su Qingjuan's residence. His gaze fell on the door for a long time, but in the end, he walked over in silence. Just like that, he returned to Kunlun's hall. He brought Atsu and sat in a quiet corner. When night came, darkness came from all directions. In the silence, Lu Chen blended into the shadows of darkness that he had not seen for a long time. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.